And today we're going to see how we can use the Microsoft 365 Copilot APIs in a SharePoint framework solution. So for those of you who were in this meeting or who have seen the YouTube video of the previous episode, we saw the overall architecture and what Copilot APIs are. I will do a quick recap just in case and just to be sure that we are all on the same page. And then I will move to the actual implementation of a nice looking SharePoint framework set of web parts, let me put it this way. I'm Paolo Pialorsi, I'm a senior developer advocate in Microsoft, and my role is to spread the knowledge about how to extend Microsoft 365, so that's why I'm here today. And talking about extending Microsoft 365, one really interesting new capability that we introduced at Ignite in preview, partially in preview, a couple of weeks ago is the capability to use a set of REST APIs to interact with Microsoft 365 Copilot, so that you can create your own custom developed solutions with whatever technology you like, and you can rely on the WorkIQ powerful capabilities, including the Copilot APIs to enrich your custom solutions. What are the APIs available through the Copilot APIs? This is the set of APIs that are available right now, and the search API and the chat API are those that I will focus on today in this demo. The search API allows you to, as the name implies, rely on the natural language syntax to make a search query across the content you have in the target Microsoft 365 tenant using the Copilot engine to search for the content. The chat API allows you to create your own chat-based solution, which in the backend relies on the actual engine, so the orchestrator and the foundational model and all the knowledge base and capability of Microsoft 365 Copilot, but you can do that from whatever technology and whatever application you like. The other APIs will not be covered in this demo, and if you want to dig into them, as I said, you can find another video on the YouTube channel of the community where you can see and dig into all of them. So now let's focus on using these APIs from within a SharePoint framework solution. So since the Copilot APIs rely on the same endpoints and technology that we use for Microsoft Graph and nowadays WorkIQ, speaking more in general about the new technologies for interacting with our Microsoft 365 tenant content, well, you can simply rely on the Microsoft Graph Client B3 type inside SharePoint Framework, and you can easily get access to the APIs to consume chat and search. Both chat and search are under preview, as I said. So right now, in order to being able to reach those APIs, you need to go for the beta version, and you will not find them now in version 1.0. And once you target the beta version, you can simply provide the URL of the endpoint you want to target to start a chat conversation or a search. Of course, since we are going to target content which is stored in the Microsoft 365 tenant where we are, we also need to have proper permissions set up for our SharePoint Framework solution. So in the Web API permission request section of the package solution.json file, this is the list, as you can see on this slide, the list of permission scopes that we need to being able to interact with the whole set of capabilities. Then, depending on what you want to do, you might not need to go to the mail and you don't need the mail.read, or you don't need to browse the people and you don't need the people read all, or whatever else. But generally speaking, if you want to have the whole set of capabilities available at your hands and at your end user hands, this is the list of permissions you need. And as you can see, all of them are permissions to read content, because through Copilot, we don't necessarily need to update data, but actually we just want to read the content we have in the tenant. And then, as I was telling you, we simply rely on the Microsoft Graph Client, we target the beta version, and we provide as the API URL, the URL of the API that we want to consume. So now, let's have a high-level overview of what are the technical requirements to consume the chat and the search APIs, and then I will move to the actual implementation of the demo that I'm going to show you. So whenever you want to use the Copilot chat API, First of all, you will need to create a new conversation. So there is a specific API endpoint that you need to use to do the handshake and to get back from the Copilot chat API a conversation ID, which you will need for whatever else message you want to send in the chat session with the Copilot chat. So you create the conversation, you save the conversation ID somewhere, for example, in the state of your component, of your React component, if you are relying on React in your web part implementation. And then whenever you send a chat message, you provide the conversation ID within the content of the chat message to instruct the Copilot API about what is the chat conversation ID you want to target. And then you get back a JSON response, which will include all of the information about the conversation, and you will be able to render the output with whatever technology you like, including information like the citations eventually available for the response you get, the sensitivity labels, and all the other stuff that relates to the response you get. So when you make a request, just to give you an idea, the request for a chat message will be made of the text message itself. So we could say the prompt of the user, okay? So you collect the prompt and you put it inside the message text property. The location hint property is the one you use to instruct the Copilot chat engine about the time zone you want to use in the response. And then additional context is really useful whenever you want to add specific contextual information to the Copilot chat API. As you can see, this property is optional and is an array. So you can provide 0 or more strings with context, which could be just information about the user, like you want to let Copilot know that the user has some specific information or capabilities or features based on the user profile, or maybe you want to provide instructions like you do when you create an agent, and I will show you an example soon. And then once you have done that, you can also optionally provide the contextual resources, which allow you to select if you want to enable the web search or not. So by setting the is web enabled in the web context, you can switch on or off the options to rely also on the web content available through Microsoft Bing. And then you can also provide a list of files that you can use as grounding data, as additional information for your prompt, so that you will instruct Copilot to simply target the files, the URLs that you provide through this array of files. When you send such kind of a message to the chat API, you get back a response, which is providing you back the information about the conversation itself in the header part. And then in the messages array, you will get back all of the messages which are part of the current conversation. And for each of them, for example, in the attributions, you will find the citations, if any, in the response. In the text of the message, you will find the actual response from Copilot, which usually is a markdown formatted content. So it is a good idea to rely on a markdown rendering React component. And then you can also get information about the sensitivity of the data that you get back from Copilot through the sensitivity label section of the response. And you will see it in action soon in the demo. Talking about the Copilot Search API, instead, what we do with the Search API is to just trigger a search based on a prompt. So we use natural language to define the search query. So we send the search request. We don't need to do any kind of initialization. We don't need any conversation ID. We just trigger the request sending the search as a natural language prompt, and we get back the response that we can process to render the output. In the request, we have the query itself, which will be natural language, the page size if we want to do paging across all of the responses, and then the data sources that we want to target if, again, also with the search experience, we want to target a specific subset of documents and content in our Microsoft 365 tenant. And we can also specify through the resource metadata names if we want to retrieve not only the URLs of the items matching the search query, but also some additional metadata for those documents, like, for example, the title or the author of the document. When you trigger the search request, you get back a response, which is yet another JSON response. And in that one, you will find the total count of items matching your search criteria. So if you are doing paging, for example, you get back 100 items matching the search criteria, but you will get them 20 by 20. And you can use the add OData next link to move to the next page. And you can read how many items are matching through the total count. And then you have the search if array, which gives you back for each and every item matching your search criteria, what the item is with a web URL, with a preview, short preview of the content of the item, the resource type to let you know what kind of item you have got back from the search result, and the resource metadata property, which is a record with a string to represent the name of the metadata field, and the other unknown field is the actual value of that specific metadata property in the item. So this is just to give you a better understanding of the API itself. But now let's move to the actual demo and see it first of all in action and then from a code implementation perspective. So let me move here. And the demo I'm going to show you is already available on the sample gallery. And you can find the URL to this page in the chat message that I pasted in the call a few minutes ago. And you will find it, I guess, in the comments related to the YouTube video related to this demo. Now, it's available on GitHub as such. And it relies on the Copilot APIs. And again, this URL is available also in the documentation of this sample, and will allow you to go through all of the APIs available nowadays through the Copilot APIs. Now, this is the actual demo that I implemented for you. Let's start with the search, and then we will move to the Copilot chat. Just to give you an idea of how the search capabilities work, we can, for example, provide a search query like, can you find documents about auto insurance? Now I'm in a tenant which is targeted for an hypothetical Java insurance company where I have documents about insurance, insurance claims, insurance claim policies, and content like that. So by providing this natural language query, can you find documents about auto insurance and triggering it with the search button, I can get back from the Copilot Search API the list of documents that are matching my criteria. I can see that I have a link to open the documents directly from this interface. I can see the highlighted words matching my search criteria, and I can see who the author is. If we look at the message we get as a response from the search API, let's do it again. Let's search it again. As you can see, we make a REST API request for the Copilot/search endpoint. In the payload, as I was telling you, we have the content I was showing you on the slide deck, and I'm retrieving the title and author of the documents matching the criteria. And in the response, we get for all of them the web URL, the resource type, the preview of the content, which is the one we see right here, as well as the highlighting of the matching words and the resource metadata for every single item. So precisely what I was telling you before. How does it work? Well, let me switch to Visual Studio Code. And here we have the Copilot Search Web part. In the Copilot Search Web part, I'm relying on a service that I implemented so that I can use the service scope-based model for my services. So basically, inside this web part, whenever I go through the on init, I get an instance of this Copilot Search Service, which is actually implementing the iCopilot Search Service interface, which provides me just a search method, which looks for the query string and the option I was telling you about before. And then in the actual implementation of the Copilot Chat Service, when Copilot Search Service, when I go to the constructor, I can create a new instance of all of the needed tools. And right here, for example, I need to rely on the Microsoft Graph Client. So I use the service scope object to get a new instance of the Graph Client Factory. And then I get an instance of the Microsoft Graph Client version 3, so that in the search function, I can simply say, once I go through all of the settings and all of the input parameters for my search, that I want to create a request body, I want to configure the page size, I want to configure any additional data sources, and then I simply want to make a post request, providing that JSON request body to the Copilot/search endpoint for the beta version of Graph. And I get back the response so that I can render it in the output, which I handle in the Copilot search React component, where I simply take care of handling the search request from the user. I get the search query from the UI, and then I get the Copilot search service instance if it is available, and I rely on that one to trigger the search method and to get back the response that I will store in the state of my React component. So that in the React component, I can simply do the rendering of all of the items matching my search criteria. Should be here. Okay, search result.map. And for each of them, I extract the title, the author, and the preview, the formatted one. And as such, I can render with a div the output of every single matching item. So pretty simple and straightforward. And as I said, you will find the source code on GitHub. It's already there. Second option, second part, is the Copilot chat one. So in this one, we are going to rely on the Copilot chat APIs. So first of all, in the settings of this web part, in the properties, you can configure the additional instructions. And for this one, for example, I said you are an insurance advisor helping user to find information about insurance-related topics. If the prompt is not related to insurance topics, simply answer, I'm sorry, this is out of my context. Use emojis in your responses. So this is the set of contextual information I'm providing to the Copilot chat API web part. Then I also have a flag that I can use to enable or disable the web content. And I wanted also to have the capability with a really basic user experience. Right now, you can improve it if you like, but I can provide as a comma-separated list all of the documents I want to target. Specifically, in my demo scenario, what I have is a document library in SharePoint Online, where I store a bunch of documents, including a claim policies document for the auto insurances and another one for the homeowners insurances. So what I'm doing right here is that I'm targeting, let me make much more space here, I'm targeting both of the documents here so that all of the prompts that I will send through this specific and dedicated chat hosted in SharePoint Online through SharePoint Framework will simply target the claims policies for my insurances in the hypothetical Zava company. So here, from a user experience perspective, I can, for example, provide a prompt like, what are the claims insurance policies for our company? So a really generic one right now. I will trigger this request, and it will target the Copilot chat API. Again, and one more time, I think it is a bit too late to see with F12 what's going on, but I will make another prompt to show you what's going on the wire. But now, the Copilot engine is processing my request. And of course, it is up to you to build a nice looking UI like the one we have in Copilot when we see the multicolored dots moving on the screen to give the idea that something is happening under the cover. And once the Copilot engine will be ready, we will get back through the API endpoint the response, and here it is. And let me show you what's in the response. Let me make much more room for it. So here we have the output, including all of the information retrieved from my target documents in the target document library in SharePoint Online. And this is well formatted using Markdown. Of course, I can keep on chatting on the same conversation. So I can start asking information for claim policies for auto insurance, for example. Let's do that. And now the request will be yet another request for the chat endpoint. Let me make much more room while it is working on it. So it is a request for this specific endpoint. As you can see here, we have the conversation ID that we initialized at the beginning of our conversation. And in the request, we provide the additional context and all of the information I was showing you before, like the files, and I've got the response. And in the response, we get the data structure I told you before with the messages array and with all of the messages, including the message that I sent, as well as the message that I received back from the actual conversation, as well as all of the citations to the documents which are related to the response I've got. And again, one more time, I can show you that I've got back the response, including emojis, if I like to get them back from the agent. In case you provide a prompt which is not targeting the actual context, like can you explain me how LLMs work, you will get back the I'm sorry, this is out of my context, which is the behavior I defined for my custom web part. So this is, again, really nice looking and powerful. And whenever you start a new conversation, you will see that now we reset all of the context. And if I'll make another prompt, the last one, we will see that we are going to create a new conversation first, and we get back the idea of a new conversation through the Copilot/conversation endpoint. And then we use that conversation ID to interact with the Copilot chat API. So now let's move again to the source code and let's see how it is implemented. And here we are. Okay, so let me close the Copilot search one, and we have the Copilot chat web part. In this one, same architecture as before. So in the web part, we create an instance using the service scope of a service called Copilot Chat Service, which implements the iCopilot Chat Service. So the iCopilot Chat Service is a bit more complex than the search one. In fact, we have, first of all, in that file, also the definition of all of the data structure we use, like the conversation message, and all of the data structure that we need to handle in order to properly manage the request and response with the Copilot Chat API. And then in the actual interface, we provide the create Copilot conversation function, which will be the one triggering the creation of a new conversation to retrieve a new conversation ID. And then the send chat message, which will rely on the information we can provide to the actual backend chat API of Copilot. So in the real implementation of the service, as before in the constructor, we get a reference to the Microsoft Graph client. And then in the create Copilot conversation, really easily, we just target the Copilot/conversation with the post empty body under the beta version, and we get back the conversation object, which will include the conversation ID. And whenever we send a message to the chat conversation, we provide the conversation ID we want to target, the message, and all of the options, including the optional ones. And again, we process the business logic. We see what input arguments we've got from the user. We create a request body as a chat message request, including the user prompt, the location hint, which are mandatory, and then we add any other additional property if it is provided. Once we are ready with the layout, with the setup of our request body, we post it to the Copilot/conversation/the ID of the target conversation/chat. We get back the response and we provide it to the Copilot chat component. In the Copilot chat component, we have quite some logic to handle whether if we are processing the message from the user, let me close this one, the message provided by the user or the message provided as a response by Copilot Chat API. And here we handle that, defining if the role of the message was assistant or the user. We store all of the messages in the state to keep track of all of the conversation in a scrollable user experience. But whenever we want to start a new conversation, if it is not there yet, we simply trigger the new conversation with the function we have in the service. And whenever we want to send a new chat message, we rely on the Copilot chat service and we send a message with the input arguments I was telling you about before. And then we process the output and we store the output in the state of the React component. And as before, if I scroll down a bit, in the React component, we have the actual rendering of the UI, which includes the rendering of the chat history, which will be mapped to a set of divs, which will change the output based on the fact that the message is for the user or for the assistant. And then there we render also the response we get from, and the content of the message we get from Copilot using this React Markdown component that allows me to do proper rendering of Markdown content inside the UI of my web part. So again, simple and straightforward, quite some business logic behind the scenes to handle the user experience. And last but not least, in the package solution.json file of my solution, I need to provide the web API permission request sections in which I can then specify all of the permission scopes I need in order to being able to consume my target API. And that's it. This solution has been already created using the release candidate of SharePoint Framework 1.22. So you can also have fun with the latest and greatest release of SPFx if you like. So just as a reminder, go to the sample gallery and feel free to download the sample and have fun with it. That said, as a reminder, the useful links for this demo, and you can find them in the chat as well. And I think that's all for me, and we can just say thank you.